The blood was still warm on Margaret's hands when she threw back her head and laughed, a sound that cut through the morning air like breaking glass. 8-year-old Emma's pet bunny lay twisted and still on the pristine lawn, its white fur stained crimson. Oops, Margaret sneered, wiping her hands on her designer jeans. But behind her, something moved in the shadows of the trees, something with pale blue eyes and deadly grace. Margaret's laughter died in her throat as she turned to face the most beautiful predator. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the manicured lawns of Ridgewood Estates, where million-dollar homes stood like monuments to success. Dr. Marcus Chen had chosen this neighborhood precisely because it seemed safe. Predictable, a place where his 8-year-old daughter Emma could grow up without the chaos he'd known as a child. He'd been wrong about many things, but nothing more than Margaret Winters. Marcus stepped onto his back porch, coffee mug in hand, expecting to find Emma playing with Snowball, the white Holland Lop bunny he'd bought her for her birthday 3 months ago. Instead, he found his daughter kneeling on the grass, her small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Emma. What's wrong, sweetheart?" She looked up at him with eyes red from crying, her face streaked with dirt and tears. "Daddy, Snowball won't wake up." The coffee mug slipped from Marcus's fingers, shattering against the stone patio. He rushed to his daughter's side, his heart already knowing what his mind refused to accept. The bunny lay motionless in the grass, its neck twisted at an unnatural angle, a thin line of blood trickling from its mouth. "Oh, Emma." Marcus gathered his daughter into his arms, feeling her small body trembling against his chest. "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." "Is he really gone?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. Marcus closed his eyes, fighting back his own tears. "Yes, sweetheart. He's gone." The sound of laughter, bright, cruel, and completely inappropriate, cut through the morning air. Marcus's head snapped up to see Margaret Winters standing at the fence that separated their properties, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the sunlight, her red lips curved in an amused smile. "Well, well," Margaret called out, her voice carrying the casual cruelty of someone who'd never faced real consequences. "Looks like little Emma learned an important lesson about life today." Marcus stood slowly, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Margaret Winters had been a thorn in his side since the day they'd moved in 2 years ago. She'd complained about Emma's laughter being too loud, about their perfectly legal fence being an eyesore, about the cherry tree in their backyard dropping blossoms onto her precious lawn. But this was something else entirely. "Margaret," Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. "Did you do this?" She laughed again, the sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Do what?" "I was just taking my morning walk when I saw the poor little thing having some kind of fit. Looked like it was suffering, really. I did what any compassionate person would do. I put it out of its misery." "You killed my daughter's pet," Marcus said, each word carefully enunciated. "I ended its suffering," Margaret corrected, examining her manicured nails with theatrical boredom. "Though I suppose I should have checked if it was actually sick first." "Oh well. Live and learn, right?" Emma's sobs grew louder, and Marcus felt something dark and primal stirring in his chest. Margaret had crossed a line, not just by killing Snowball, but by laughing about it, by standing there smirking while his daughter's heart broke into pieces. "You psychotic bitch," Marcus snarled, taking a step toward the fence. Margaret's smile widened. Now, Dr. Chen. Is that any way for a respected veterinarian to talk? What would your clients think if they knew you had such a temper?" That's when Marcus realized this wasn't random cruelty, it was calculated. Margaret had been planning this, waiting for the perfect moment to strike where it would hurt most. She knew exactly what Snowball meant to Emma, knew exactly how to inflict maximum damage. "You're insane," Marcus breathed. "I'm practical," Margaret replied, straightening her designer jogging outfit. "Your daughter needed to learn that life isn't all sunshine and rainbows. Consider this a valuable lesson in reality. She's 8 years old. Old enough to understand that actions have consequences. Your little princess has been letting that rabbit dig holes under my fence, ruining my landscaping. I warned you about it weeks ago." Marcus's mind raced. He remembered the Conversation. Margaret had complained about some minor damage to the flower bed along their shared fence line. He'd promised to keep a closer eye on Snowball, had even reinforced the fence on his side. But apparently, that hadn't been enough for Margaret. So you murdered a child's pet over some flowers? Marcus's voice was barely controlled fury. I solved a problem, Margaret said with a shrug. The rabbit was a nuisance and now it's not. Simple as that. Emma's crying had quieted to soft hiccups, but Marcus could feel her small hand gripping his shirt with desperate strength. He knelt beside her again, brushing the hair from her face with gentle fingers. Emma, I need you to go inside for a few minutes, okay? I need to talk to Ms. Winters. But Daddy, what about Snowball? I'll take care of everything, sweetheart. I promise. Emma nodded reluctantly and ran toward the house, her small feet pounding across the deck. Marcus waited until he heard the door slam before standing and facing Margaret again. You have no idea what you've just done, he said quietly. Margaret rolled her eyes. Oh, please. It's a rabbit, not a family member. Buy her a goldfish and she'll forget all about it in a week. That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works. Look, Dr. Chen, I'm sorry your daughter is upset, but no. Marcus's voice cut through her fake apology like a blade. You're not sorry. You're enjoying this. You're standing there gloating because you managed to make an 8-year-old cry. Margaret's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. Sometimes children need to learn hard lessons. Better she learns now than later. She's a child. She's a spoiled little princess who needs to understand that the world doesn't revolve around her and her precious pets. Marcus felt his control slipping. 2 years of passive-aggressive comments, complaints to the Homeowners Association, and deliberate provocations had all led to this moment. Margaret had finally gone too far. Get off my property, Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous. Actually, I'm on the easement, Margaret replied with a smug smile. Public property. I have every right to be here. Then stay away from my family. Or what? You'll sic your lawyer on me. Please. I have the best legal team in the city on retainer. Marcus stared at her, this woman who had just destroyed his daughter's innocence for the sake of some twisted power game. Margaret Winters was everything he despised about people with too much money and too little conscience, cruel, entitled, and completely convinced that her wealth made her untouchable. This isn't over, Marcus said quietly. Margaret laughed, the sound echoing across the pristine lawns of Ridgewood Estates. Oh, Dr. Chen, it is most definitely over. And I won. She turned to walk away, her designer sneakers crunching on the gravel path. But she'd only taken a few steps when she stopped, looking back over her shoulder with that same cruel smile. Oh, and Marcus. Next time, maybe teach your daughter to keep her pets under control. Some of us have standards to maintain. As Margaret disappeared around the corner, Marcus stood alone in his backyard, Snowball's lifeless body at his feet and his daughter's sobs echoing from inside the house. The morning sun continued to shine, the birds continued to sing, and the world continued to spin as if nothing had changed. But something had changed. Something fundamental and irreversible. Marcus Chen had always been a man who believed in justice. Through proper channels, police, lawyers, courts. He'd spent his life healing animals, not hurting them. But as he knelt beside Snowball's broken body, feeling the weight of his daughter's devastation, he realized that sometimes the proper channels weren't enough. Sometimes monsters like Margaret Winters only understood one language. And Marcus was about to become fluent in it. The sound of footsteps on gravel made him look up. Margaret was returning, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice carrying clearly across the morning air. Yes, I want to report an incident of verbal assault and threatening behavior, she was saying, her tone sickeningly sweet. Yes, I'll hold for an officer. Marcus's blood turned to ice. She wasn't content with just destroying Emma's pet, she was going to try to destroy him too. But as Margaret continued her phone call, neither she nor Marcus noticed the shadow that moved through the trees at the edge of the property. Something pale and powerful, with blue eyes like winter sky and muscles coiled like steel springs. Something that had been watching. Something that was getting very, very hungry. Detective Sarah Martinez had seen enough domestic disputes in her 15 years on the force to recognize the signs of an escalating situation. The call had come in at 9:47 a.m., a wealthy woman claiming her neighbor had threatened her over a pet incident. Standard suburban drama, or so she'd thought. But as she pulled into the circular driveway of Margaret Winter's estate, something felt off. The woman who answered the door was disheveled, her designer clothes torn and dirty, her usually perfect hair hanging in tangles around her face. Her eyes darted constantly to the tree line behind her property, as if she expected something to emerge from the shadows. "Thank God you're here," Margaret breathed, ushering Sarah inside with shaking hands. "I've been waiting by the window. I don't feel safe going outside." Sarah's trained eye took in the woman's appearance, the scratches on her arms, the mud on her knees, the way her hands trembled as she poured coffee with expensive china that rattled against the saucer. This wasn't the composed socialite who'd made the call. "Mrs. Winters, you said on the phone that your neighbor threatened you. Can you tell me exactly what happened?" Margaret's story came out in fragments, each piece more dramatic than the last. According to her, Dr. Chen had become violently aggressive when she tried to discuss a property dispute. He'd made vague threats about making her pay and had looked at her with murderous intent. But as Sarah listened, she noticed the inconsistencies. The timeline didn't quite add up. Margaret claimed the confrontation had happened at 9:15 a.m. But the call to police had come in at 9:47. What had happened in those 32 minutes? "Mrs. Winters, I need you to be completely honest with me. What exactly was this property dispute about?" Margaret's jaw tightened. It was about boundaries. "Dr. Chen has been allowing his daughter's pet to damage my landscaping. When I tried to address the issue, he became unstable." "And how did you address the issue?" For the first time, Margaret's mask slipped completely. Her eyes went flat and cold, revealing something calculating underneath. "I removed the problem." Sarah's hand instinctively moved closer to her weapon. "What do you mean, you removed the problem?" "The rabbit was destroying my property. I had every right to protect my investments." "Are you telling me you killed a child's pet?" Margaret's chin lifted defiantly. "I solved a problem that Dr. Chen refused to address. The animal was a nuisance." Sarah stared at her, understanding now why the woman looked so disheveled. She'd killed a child's pet, then had the audacity to call the police when the father got angry about it. But that still didn't explain the torn clothes and the paranoid glances toward the woods. "Mrs. Winters, what happened after your confrontation with Dr. Chen? You look like you've been through something traumatic." Margaret's composure cracked again. "Oh. I went for a walk to calm down. There was an incident in the woods." "What kind of incident?" I think there might be a dangerous animal loose in the area. Something big. With blue eyes." Sarah's blood ran cold. 6 months ago, there had been reports of an escaped snow leopard from a research facility up north. The search had been called off after 3 months with no sightings, but the animal had never been found. If it was still alive, still out there. "Mrs. Winters, I need you to describe exactly what you saw." Margaret's hands shook as she set down her coffee cup. "It was huge. Pale, with dark spots. It just watched me. Like it was deciding whether to attack." "Did it approach you?" "It stepped closer. I thought I was going to die." Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper. "I've never been so scared in my life." Sarah made notes, her mind racing. A snow leopard loose in a residential area was a nightmare scenario. These weren't domestic cats, they were apex predators capable of taking down prey much larger than themselves. And if this one had been surviving in the wild for 6 months, it would be hungry and potentially desperate. "Mrs. Winters, I need you to stay inside and keep your doors locked. I'm going to call Animal Control and the State Wildlife Department. We need to get a team out here immediately." "What about Dr. Chen?" "He threatened me." Sarah looked at her with barely concealed disgust. You killed a child's pet. If I were Dr. Chen, I'd be angry too. But right now, we have a bigger problem to deal with. As Sarah left Margaret's house, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. The woman was clearly unstable, possibly dangerous herself. But the description of the animal was too detailed to be fabricated. And the fear in Margaret's eyes had been genuine. Meanwhile, 2 houses down, Marcus Chen was sitting in his living room with his daughter Emma curled up in his lap, both of them still processing the morning's events. The small wooden box containing snowballs remained set on the mantel, surrounded by flowers Emma had picked from their garden. "Daddy, why did Ms. Winters hurt Snowball?" Emma asked, her voice small and broken. Marcus stroked her hair, trying to find words that would make sense of senseless cruelty. "Some people are sick inside, sweetheart. They hurt others because they are hurting themselves. But Snowball never hurt anyone." "No, he didn't. He was innocent, just like you." Emma was quiet for a long moment, then looked up at her father with eyes that seemed older than her 8 years. "Are you going to hurt her back?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. Was he that transparent? Could his daughter see the dark thoughts that had been churning in his mind since the moment he'd found Snowball's body? "No, Emma. I'm not going to hurt anyone. That's not who we are." But even as he said the words, Marcus felt the lie burning in his throat. He wanted to hurt Margaret Winters. He wanted to make her feel a fraction of the pain she'd inflicted on his daughter. The urge was primal, overwhelming, and growing stronger by the hour. The doorbell rang, interrupting his dark thoughts. Through the window, he could see a police car in his driveway. Marcus's stomach dropped. Had Margaret actually followed through on her threat to have him arrested? He opened the door to find Detective Martinez, her expression carefully neutral. "Dr. Chen." "I'm Detective Martinez. I need to ask you a few questions about an incident this morning." "Of course." "Emma, go to your room for a few minutes, okay?" Emma nodded and disappeared upstairs, leaving Marcus alone with the detective. He invited her into his living room, noting how her eyes took in every detail: the family photos, the medical diplomas on the wall, the small wooden box on the mantel. "Dr. Chen, I understand you had a confrontation with your neighbor Margaret Winters this morning." Marcus chose his words carefully. "I discovered that she had killed my daughter's pet rabbit. I was upset, yes, but I didn't threaten her." "Can you tell me exactly what happened?" Marcus recounted the morning's events, watching Detective Martinez's expression change as he described finding Snowball's body and Margaret's cruel laughter. When he finished, the detective was quiet for a long moment. "Dr. Chen, I have to ask, did you make any threats against Mrs. Winters?" "I told her to stay away from my family." "I don't consider that a threat." "And after your confrontation, did you follow her or attempt to intimidate her in any way?" Marcus frowned. "No. I buried my daughter's pet and tried to comfort her." "Why would you ask that?" Detective Martinez leaned forward. "Mrs. Winters claims she encountered a dangerous animal in the woods after your confrontation. She seems to think it might be connected to your situation." "I'm a veterinarian, detective. I don't keep wild animals as pets." "I'm not suggesting you do. But there have been reports of an escaped snow leopard in the area. If it's still alive, it could be extremely dangerous." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. "A snow leopard? Here? In their quiet suburban neighborhood?" The implications were staggering. Snow leopards were incredibly powerful predators, capable of taking down prey several times their size. If one was loose in Ridgewood Estates, "Detective, you need to warn people. Keep them inside until it's found." "We are working on it. But I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you seen anything unusual in the woods around your property?" Marcus thought back to the morning, trying to remember any details he might have missed. There had been something, a feeling of being watched, perhaps, or a shadow that had moved wrong. But he'd been so focused on Emma's grief that he hadn't paid attention. "I'm not sure," he said finally. "Maybe. I thought I saw something moving in the trees, but I was distracted by other things." Detective Martinez nodded and stood to leave. Dr. Chen, I'm going to be honest with you. What Mrs. Winters did to your daughter's pet was cruel and probably illegal. But if you're thinking about revenge, don't. Let the system handle it. And if the system fails, the detective's expression hardened, then you deal with it like a civilized human being, not like an animal. After she left, Marcus sat alone in his living room, staring at the wooden box on the mantel. The system. He'd believed in the system his whole life, had trusted that good people would be rewarded and bad people would be punished. But Margaret Winters had just committed an act of pure evil and would probably face no consequences at all, unless someone made sure she did. The thought came unbidden, dark and seductive. Marcus tried to push it away, but it clung to his mind like a parasite. Margaret Winters needed to pay for what she'd done. Not just for Snowball's death, but for Emma's tears, for the cruel laughter, for the casual way she'd destroyed his dog. The shadow moved with liquid grace through the dense foliage that bordered the Ridgewood estates, its pale coat dappled with rosettes that made it nearly invisible among the filtered sunlight. Kira had been watching the humans for weeks now. Drawn by the scent of the small white creature that lived in the wooden structure behind the house where the man and child dwelt. She was not supposed to be here. The facility where she'd been born and raised was 300 miles north, a research station dedicated to the conservation of endangered species. But the urge to hunt, to feel earth beneath her paws instead of concrete, had driven her to escape during a routine transport 6 months ago. The headlines had screamed about the dangerous predator on the loose, but Kira had simply wanted to be free. The Rocky Mountain wilderness had sustained her for a while, but as autumn turned to winter, prey had become scarce. The scent of civilization, of easy hunting, had drawn her south, following river valleys and forest corridors that developers had somehow missed. She'd found her way to this place of manicured lawns and artificial streams, where fat domestic cats wandered freely and small dogs yapped from behind inadequate fences. But it was the white rabbit that had truly captured her attention. Not as prey, she'd learned to hunt larger game in the wild, but as a curiosity. The small creature had been so perfectly content in its wooden hutch, so trusting of the humans who cared for it. Kira had spent many dawn hours watching the child feed it, listening to her soft words of affection. Now the rabbit was dead, and the child was crying, and something primitive and protective stirred in Kira's chest. She'd seen the blonde woman approach the hutch in the early morning darkness, moving with the deliberate purpose of someone who'd planned this moment carefully. Kira had watched from the shadows as the woman had reached through the wire mesh, her hands quick and efficient as she'd snapped a rabbit's neck with cold precision. The woman had smiled afterward. Actually smiled. Kira's lip curled back from her fangs as she remembered that expression. In the wild, death was necessary, natural, predator and prey locked in an ancient dance that sustained the balance of life. But this had been different. This had been cruelty for its own sake. Now the woman was speaking into a small device, her voice carrying clearly through the morning air. "Officer, I need you to understand that I felt genuinely threatened. Dr. Chen was extremely aggressive, and I'm concerned about what he might do next." Kira's ears flicked forward, her enhanced hearing picking up every word. The woman was weaving a web of lies, each one more poisonous than the last. She spoke of feeling unsafe and intimidated, painting herself as the victim while the real victim, the grieving child, sobbed inside the house. No, he didn't actually strike me," the woman continued, but the threat was implied. The way he looked at me, the things he said. I've never been so frightened in my life. Kira's muscles coiled beneath her spotted coat. She'd seen enough death in the wild to recognize a true predator when she encountered one. This woman was something far more dangerous than any mountain lion or bear. She was a creature that killed not for sustenance or territory, but for pleasure. The back door of the house opened, and the man emerged again, this time carrying a small shovel and a wooden box. His face was set in grim lines as he knelt beside the rabbit's body, his movements gentle despite his obvious anger. He wrapped the small creature in a soft cloth before placing it in the box, his hands trembling slightly. "I'm so sorry, little one," he whispered, his voice carrying to Kira's sensitive ears. "You deserved so much better than this." The woman's voice rose in pitch as she continued her performance for the unseen listener. "I think he might have some kind of mental health issues. There's something not right about him, officer. I'm genuinely concerned for the safety of the neighborhood. Kira's tail lashed behind her as she watched the man's shoulders sag under the weight of his grief and rage. She recognized the look in his eyes, the same trapped desperation she'd felt in her cage at the facility, the same helpless fury that had driven her to escape. The man stood slowly, the wooden box cradled in his arms like a precious treasure. He walked to the far corner of his property, where a large oak tree cast deep shadows, and began to dig. Each thrust of the shovel was deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if he were trying to channel his anger into something constructive. Yes, I'll stay on the line until an officer arrives, the woman was saying. I just hope he doesn't do anything violent before then. That's when Kira saw the child appear at the window of the house, her small face pressed against the glass as she watched her father dig her pet's grave. The girl's expression was one of pure heartbreak, the kind of soul-deep wound that would leave scars long after the tears stopped flowing. Something shifted in Kira's chest, a feeling she'd never experienced before. Not hunger, not territorial aggression, but something warmer and more complex. A need to protect, to comfort, to ensure that no further harm came to the grieving child. The woman ended her call and slipped the phone into her pocket, her performance complete. She stood there for a moment, watching the man dig with obvious satisfaction, as if his pain were a form of entertainment. Then she turned and began walking back toward her own property, her steps light and carefree. Kira made her decision. She moved through the undergrowth with the fluid grace of a creature born to hunt, her paws silent on the forest floor. The woman was heading toward a narrow path that connected the main road to the back of her property, a private route that would take her through a dense copse of trees where no one would see what happened next. The woman was humming to herself. Actually humming, as she walked. The sound made Kira's blood run cold. This was someone who had just destroyed a child's innocence and was now planning to destroy her father's reputation, and she was humming as if she'd just enjoyed a pleasant morning stroll. Kira reached the path first, positioning herself behind a fallen log where the shadows were deepest. Her pale coat blended perfectly with the dappled sunlight, making her nearly invisible to human eyes. She crouched low, every muscle in her body coiled like a spring, waiting for the perfect moment. The woman rounded the bend, still humming her little tune, completely oblivious to the predator watching her from the shadows. She was looking at her phone again, probably composing another lie to share with her social media followers. Kira let her pass, studying her movements, learning her patterns. The woman walked with the arrogant confidence of someone who'd never been truly threatened, never had to look over her shoulder, never had to worry about becoming prey instead of predator. That was about to change. The woman stopped suddenly, her humming cutting off mid-note. She'd heard something, a rustling in the underbrush, perhaps, or the soft whisper of fur against bark. Her head turned slowly, scanning the forest around her with the first hint of real awareness she'd shown all morning. "Hello," she called out, her voice slightly less steady than before. "Is someone there?" Kira remained perfectly still, her breathing shallow and controlled. The woman's head continued to turn, her eyes wide now, some primitive part of her brain finally recognizing that she was no longer the apex predator in this scenario. "Oh. I have pepper spray," the woman announced to the empty forest, her voice cracking slightly. "And I'm not afraid to use it." Kira's lips pulled back from her fangs in what might have been a smile. Pepper spray. As if such a pitiful human weapon could stop a creature that had survived in the wild for 6 months, that had learned to hunt elk and deer with nothing but teeth and claws. The woman began walking again, faster now, her earlier confidence replaced by nervous energy. She kept glancing over her shoulder, her perfectly styled hair beginning to show signs of stress. Good. Let her feel just a fraction of the fear she'd inflicted on others. Kira followed, staying parallel to the path but deeper in the forest. Her movements so silent that even the birds didn't notice her passage. She could smell the woman's fear now, sharp and acrid beneath her expensive perfume. It was intoxicating. The woman broke into a jog, then a run, her designer sneakers slapping against the path with increasing urgency. She was breathing hard now, her phone clutched in her hand like a talisman. But there was no cell service this deep in the woods. No one to call for help, no one to weave her web of lies around. She was alone with her conscience and the consequences of her actions. Kira increased her pace, bounding through the forest with effortless grace. The woman might be running, but she was running along a predictable path, while Kira could move through the three-dimensional maze of the forest canopy. It was no contest. The woman stumbled, her expensive sneakers skidding on loose gravel. She went down hard, her phone flying from her hand to shatter against a tree trunk. For a moment, she lay there gasping, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the dirt as she struggled to catch her breath. That's when she saw the eyes. Pale blue, like winter sky, watching her from the shadows with an intelligence that was both beautiful and terrifying. The woman's scream caught in her throat as she realized what she was looking at, not a domestic cat or a small dog, but something wild and deadly that had no business being in the manicured world of Ridgewood Estates. Kira stepped forward, just enough to let the dappled sunlight reveal the true mag. The emergency response team arrived at Ridgewood Estates like a small army. Wildlife officers, animal control specialists, and armed police officers cordoned off the wooded areas while helicopters circled overhead with thermal imaging equipment. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the lead wildlife biologist, stood in the command center they'd established in the community clubhouse, studying topographical maps and trying to predict where a snow leopard might seek shelter. The animal has been surviving in the wild for 6 months, she explained to the assembled team. It's learned to avoid human contact, which makes it exponentially more dangerous. A habituated snow leopard is a dead snow leopard, they lose their natural fear of humans. Detective Martinez nodded grimly. So we are looking at a situation where it might actively hunt people. Not necessarily hunt, but defend territory or resources, yes. Snow leopards are ambush predators. They are patient, intelligent, and incredibly powerful. If this one has claimed Ridgewood Estates as its territory. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone understood the implications. Meanwhile, Margaret Winters was barricaded in her home, every window locked, every door bolted. She'd called her lawyer, her security company, and her insurance agent, trying to find someone who could make this nightmare go away. But money couldn't buy protection from something that didn't understand the concept of wealth. She stood at her bedroom window, watching the search teams comb through the woods behind her property. They were looking for the wrong thing, she realized. They were searching for a simple predator, an animal driven by hunger and instinct. But the creature she'd encountered in the woods had been something else entirely, something that had looked at her with almost human intelligence, something that had made a choice to let her live. The question was, why? Margaret's phone rang, making her jump. The caller ID showed her lawyer's number. Richard, thank God. Tell me you have good news. I'm afraid not, Margaret. The police aren't going to press charges against Dr. Chen. Apparently. Telling someone to stay away from your family after they've killed your pet doesn't constitute a threat. That's ridiculous. He was clearly unstable. Margaret, you killed a child's pet. The optics are challenging. Margaret's grip tightened. On the phone. I solved a problem. The animal was damaging my property. Be that as it may, the district attorney's office isn't interested in pursuing this. In fact, they are considering charges against you for animal cruelty. Animal cruelty? It was a rabbit. It was a pet. A beloved pet belonging to an 8-year-old girl. Margaret, I need you to understand how serious this is. If they decide to press charges, you could face jail time. Margaret sank into her chair, the weight of her situation finally hitting her. She'd thought she was untouchable, protected by her wealth and social position. But the law, it seemed, had little patience for wealthy women who tortured children's pets. Fix this, Richard. I don't care what it costs. I'm trying, but the line went dead. Margaret stared at her phone, then realized the problem wasn't with the call. Her landline was dead too. And the lights in her house were flickering. Someone had cut her power. 3 houses away, Marcus Chen was sitting in his home office, staring at the mysterious text message on his phone. Justice is coming. The words seemed to pulse with dark promise, filling him with both dread and anticipation. He tried to focus on normal things, checking on Emma, making lunch, reviewing patient files. But his mind kept returning to the Message to the creature he'd seen in the woods, to the cruel laughter that had followed his daughter's tears. Emma appeared in his doorway, her small face pale and drawn. "Daddy, there are police cars everywhere. Are they looking for the person who hurt Snowball?" Marcus's throat tightened. How could he explain that they were looking for something far more dangerous than a cruel neighbor? "They are just making sure everyone is safe, sweetheart." "Will they catch the bad people?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Would they? Would Margaret Winters face any real consequences for her actions? Or would she simply pay a fine and continue terrorizing the neighborhood with her petty cruelties? Marcus's phone buzzed again. Another message from the same unknown number, "Check the news." With trembling fingers, Marcus opened his laptop and navigated to the local news website. The headline made his blood run cold: "Dangerous predator stalks exclusive neighborhood." The story was filled with sensationalized details about the escaped snow leopard, speculation about potential attacks, and quotes from terrified residents. But buried in the article was a single paragraph that made Marcus's heart race. Police sources confirmed that the predator may be exhibiting unusual behavior patterns, possibly indicating a level of intelligence not typically seen in wild animals. Residents are advised to remain indoors and avoid any contact with the creature. Unusual behavior patterns. Intelligence not typically seen in wild animals. Marcus stared at the words, a terrible possibility taking shape in his mind. What if the snow leopard wasn't just a random predator? What if it was something more? His phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. Detective Martinez's name appeared on the screen. "Dr. Chen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. As a veterinarian, what do you know about snow leopard behavior?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "They are solitary predators, highly intelligent and extremely elusive. They typically avoid human contact unless they are cornered or protecting cubs." "What about revenge? Could a snow leopard hold a grudge?" The question was so unexpected that Marcus almost dropped the phone. "Detective, are you asking me if snow leopards are capable of premeditated revenge?" "I'm asking if there's any scientific basis for what we are seeing. This animal isn't behaving like a typical predator. It's not hunting for food, it's stalking specific individuals." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "What do you mean, specific individuals?" "Mrs. Winters has reported multiple sightings around her property. But none of the other residents have seen anything. It's like this creature is focused on her alone. That's unusual. Dr. Chen, I need you to think carefully. Is there any way this animal could be connected to what happened to your daughter's pet?" Marcus's mind raced. Was Detective Martinez suggesting what he thought she was suggesting? That somehow, the snow leopard was involved in dispensing justice for Snowball's murder. "Detective, I think you are giving this animal too much credit. It's probably just attracted to something at Mrs. Winters' property, food, shelter, something like that." "Maybe. But I've been a cop for 15 years and I've learned to trust my instincts. And my instincts are telling me that this is more than just a random predator looking for an easy meal." After she hung up, Marcus sat in his office, staring at his phone. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture that was both impossible and undeniable. The snow leopard's appearance just hours after Margaret's cruel act. Its focus on her property. The intelligence that even the police had noticed. And the text messages. Someone was orchestrating this, guiding events towards some inevitable conclusion. Marcus's phone buzzed once more. This time, the message was longer. "She took something precious from your daughter. Tonight, she pays the price. Stay inside and keep Emma safe. Justice has many forms, but it always has teeth." Marcus stared at the message, his hands shaking. Whoever was sending these texts knew about Snowball, knew about Emma, knew about the rage that burned in his chest like acid. They were offering him exactly what he wanted: revenge against the woman who had destroyed his daughter's innocence. But at what cost? As if summoned by his thoughts, Emma appeared in his doorway again. "Daddy, I'm scared. All the police cars and helicopters, it feels like something bad is going to happen." Marcus pulled his daughter into his arms, holding her close. She was right to be scared. Something bad was going to happen, he could feel it in the air like an approaching storm. The question was whether he would try to stop it or simply let justice take its course. Outside, the sun was setting over Ridgewood Estates, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. In the woods behind Margaret Winter's house, something pale and deadly moved through the shadows with purposeful grace. The hunt was about to begin. And somewhere in the darkness, a pair of pale blue eyes watched Margaret's house with infinite patience, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The reckoning Margaret Winters had earned with her cruelty was finally at hand. And unlike the legal system she'd manipulated for years, this judge would not be swayed by money or social position. This judge had fangs, and it was hungry for justice.